Kendall here is going to be our next speaker, talking about the plastic crisis and what we can do for social change, but also about polymers and replacement options that we could look at to solve this problem.
Thanks everyone for taking time out of your planting schedule to come and hear me speak about something that I've become quite obsessed with over the last couple of years. And that's the plastic crisis and what we can do to solve it. It's a very complex problem. However, if we're going to solve it, the fundamental is that we need to turn plastic off at the tap. And so I've gotten quite into some bio-based alternatives that can essentially replace plastics and therefore give us a materials economy that's based on soils, not oils. So the way I see the plastic crisis is it's essentially the climate crisis in material form. Plastics are made from petrochemicals. There's the extraction process, the actual making of the polymers, and then obviously all the transportation that's required. And obviously when you think about climate, there's emissions are invisible, so they're hard to see. Carbon accounting is hard for people to wrap their head around, but plastic is very visible. We can't escape it. We see it on our beaches. In this shot here, this is one of the trash mountains in Java, Indonesia. There's the Pacific plastic ocean patch, which apparently is the size of Alaska at the moment. So it's very visible. It's hard for us to ignore, and yet ignore it we do. And I put this down to something that we're calling materials blindness. And to be honest, before I got into this space, working in this space, I suffered from materials blindness. And really, materials drive our economy. It's almost like fish don't realize they're swimming in water. Everything from the chairs you're sitting on, the cars that we drive, the clothes that we wear, everything that we buy, eat, relies on a materials economy. And an interesting thing is that our materials usage grows pretty much in parity with the growth of the economy and the growth of GDP. So this waste crisis and plastic crisis that we've got, it's not just a systems issue in terms of what we're throwing away, it's also an issue in terms of what we're making. Now, what are we making in terms of plastic? This is a shot of Cancer Alley in Louisiana. It's an 85-mile stretch on the river. There are roughly 200 petrochemical and plastic plants there. And essentially this is how plastic is made. This is where it comes from. And as you can imagine, as you can just see there, the damage it's doing to the communities there and to the environment is incredible. I mean, look at that. It's like something, it's like a cross between Bartertown from Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and Mordor from Lord of the Rings. In fact, Tolkien based Mordor on what industrialization was doing to the English countryside. But if you, for the residents that live in Cancer Alley, apparently they have a 95% increased chance of contracting cancer. So with this juggernaut, plastic has been established now. I think it's had about 90 years of research and development, really started coming into its own in the 40s and 50s post-war. And it's also got these incredibly established supply chains. And so they're constantly trying to find new uses for it. And the thing is, plastic is everywhere at the moment. It's in the lining of your beer cans and your food tins. Polyesters are quite often woven throughout your bed sheets and pillowcases. Unless you're specifically seeking natural materials for your clothing, it's very likely that the clothing that you're wearing has plastics contained within it. Car tires are now made from synthetic rubber, tea bags even, paper containers and cartons. So the Tetra packs that your oat milk and coconut water come in, plastic lining. Takeaway coffee cups are lined with plastic. The stickers on our fruit, wet wipes, sunscreens, beauty products, insulate, you're getting the picture. It's absolutely everywhere and everything all at once. So if plastic's everywhere, I really do believe that the plastics crisis is a design failure of our making. If you think about, we are using our longest lasting material for some of our most temporary commodity goods. So let's go to the servo, you buy a chocolate, that wrapper that's in your hand for seconds is then in the environment and takes hundreds of years to degrade. And really we've got to start to rethink about what kind of polymers we really do need to function in this basically as convenience-obsessed society of ours. Because one of the things with plastics is that they don't break down, they break up into smaller and smaller pieces. So break into microplastics, which are pieces that are 5 millimeters and smaller, and then they break up further and further into kind of like a microscopic dust. So it's in the air that we breathe, it's in the rain, it's in the clouds, and it's even crossed the blood-brain barrier. So with that, we need to understand that we're not really when we throw our plastic away, we're not really throwing it away, because there's only 3 places it can go, and it's in the ground, or it's in the air, or it's in the water. So really what we're doing when we throw it away, we're throwing it here. And it's increasingly showing up in our bodies. It's showing up in our organs, placentas, breast milk, and like I said, it has crossed into the blood-brain barrier. And the health implications are significant. It's difficult to essentially have a baseline because we've basically had plastic in our lives for so long. But there is an increasing body of evidence showing that the chemicals that leach out of these plastics are endocrine disrupting, so they disrupt our hormonal processes, with evidence showing that it's affecting our fertility, cognitive impairment, and even cancers as well. A recent study was showing that microplastics were found in the plaques of people with heart disease. And then obviously, there's this meme here that has been doing the rounds recently where, I don't know if you can see there, but there's a dragon with my grandpa full of lead and then my dad full of asbestos and then me full of microplastics. The evidence is mounting that this is becoming a health crisis. And I'm sure you'll all agree. So when you've got these tiny jagged pieces of plastic in you, they have these jagged edges, so they're inflammatory. So we don't really need a lot of research to know that having these things in our brain and in our organs isn't good. So there's a bit of doom and gloom with this, but I promise you this conversation is doom and gloom. We are going to get there, but we really do need to, if we're going to address this problem, we need to understand the anatomy of the problem. So we make 400 million tons of plastic per year. I don't know if you can see in that graphic, but on the top of that bin, it's all pretty much equal between consumer products, vehicles, textiles, construction, electronics, and then other miscellaneous at the top. If we're going to make a significant systems intervention here, the one I'm really wanting to focus on is that bottom part, and that's packaging, because that is 40% of the plastic that we're using. And once again, it's for those really temporary commodity goods. Now, so that means that out of the 400 million tons of plastic that we're using, 100 million tons per year globally is being used for packaging. And here is the other design problem. Only 9% of the 400 million tons that we're using is recycled. So that's a bit of a problem. Australia, as far as we're concerned as a country, we are the second largest consumer of plastics per capita after Singapore. We recycle a bit better. We do 18%, which is better than globally. It's better than America, which has gone back to 5%, but it's not up there with Europe, which is getting closer to 30, 40, and closer to 50%. But when you consider that at our current usage, that we're looking to be increasing our plastic usage by 2 to 3 times by 2050, it's clear that we're not going to recycle ourselves out of this mess. And the fossil fuel industry has seen the writing on the wall in terms of energy, in terms of transport. So they're going all in on this. They were very disruptive at the UN Plastics Negotiation Treaty, running interference there. People weren't able to reach an agreement. So they're really going all in on this. And even here in Australia, we've got some legislation coming up, and there's this focus on recycling. And recycling is never really the solution it was made out to be. So, for a start, it puts it all onto us. Then there's the issue that a lot of these plastics just aren't recyclable. We're not going to be able to recycle soft plastics at scale. It's just not going to happen. And even then, some of the more recyclable plastics, it's not like aluminium where you can recycle it infinitely. It degrades over time. And most of the time, they can only be recycled 2 or 3 times. And then with the recycled material, a lot of energy has to go into that, makes them more expensive than a lot of the virgin plastics. So that means there's less of an offtake market. And another thing about recycled plastics is the polymers are weaker. So if you go and buy a top that says I'm made from recycled plastic bottles, you think you're doing something good for the environment, right? But what happens is when you put that top in your wash, those weaker polymer chains then shed microplastics. And I saw an incredible stat that I think the average family sends a plastic bag worth of plastic out to sea each month just by washing the clothes with all their plastics in it. So then the other thing is, given they've got all these endocrine disrupting chemicals and they're shedding microplastics, do we really want to be giving these materials a second or third chance at life? It's really, like I said, we need to be turning plastic off at the tap. And the other issue we've got here is we're not even a recycling economy, we're a linear economy. Some of you may have heard about the circular economy, but really by and large right now, a lot of the time with plastics in particular, we're a linear economy. So what that means is we take something out of the ground, we combine it with energy, we make something with it, we use it, we put it into landfill. Recycling economy in the middle there is that we're still taking things out of the ground, combining with energy to make things, but we're recirculating some of those materials. We're collecting them, reprocessing them, but it's still really lossy. Generally, at least with plastic, very lossy. A lot of it's still going into the ground. A circular economy is different. It's where, yes, we're using materials, but we're using design, technology, and systems to ensure that we're keeping these materials in a closed loop. Now, I say this as a circular economy advocate. I'm afraid the only circular economy there is right now is nature. Because what we're doing is we're taking things out of the ground, we're toxifying them, and then we're giving them back to nature with those toxins in them. And so nature cannot accept them back. So what we need to do is we need to start looking to nature. So we are a closed loop system on our planet. And a true circular economy or an ecosystem is only in balance when there isn't an accumulation of waste, and also there is, we're then able to then process that waste at the other end of it. So we're failing on both fronts there at the moment. But if we look to nature, and this is where I'm getting really excited, this is the bloom part. There's some really exciting innovations happening with some startups based here in Australia, over in Europe, and in the UK, where you've got some really smart, innovative scientists and entrepreneurs are looking to nature and mimicking it. So it's the other one known as biomimicry, those processes. So imagine if we could take the nutrients from nature, still make a plastic alternative that doesn't have the consequences, keep the material clean so that when it goes back to nature, it can absorb those nutrients back into nature. And that's where I think we really do need to be focusing our attention on biopolymers. Now, I need to do a definition here because bioplastics have a bit of a brand problem. There's been a bit of greenwash. A lot of materials were labelled as bioplastics, but they had toxins in them, either PFAS or other forms of plastic, so that when they degraded, they were actually sending microplastics back into the environment. So my definition of a biopolymer is a polymer, a material that is bioderived from feedstocks. So ideally renewable feedstocks, low impact feedstocks such as food waste, existing waste from other materials, agricultural byproducts, and other renewable fast growing resources. So it's bio-derived. The process in and of itself, quite often the process is used to make these materials. It's like a fermentation process. So instead of those awful factories you saw at Cancer Alley, you basically got a brewery to make these materials. And then at the end of life, importantly, they bioassimilate. So this is another sort of word that's kind of been hit by greenwash, which is biodegradable. There are a lot of bags out there or materials out there that they say it's biodegradable, but once again, it's only in certain conditions. There are toxins and chemicals in there that only an industrial composting process can make them biodegrade. So we've got to make sure that these materials are non-toxic and can compost at end of life, even in a backyard compost. So it's still pretty early days. Like I said, plastic has the jump on us by about 90 years. And so it's still a bit too early to be picking winners, but I thought just for the purposes of today, I'd give some examples on some rock stars and materials that have been gaining a lot of traction. And one of my favorite, I think everyone loves seaweed, is seaweed-based materials. So these poly bags here are made by a company called Sway out of the UK. They're using seaweed to make soft plastic alternatives, such as poly bags and other plastic wraps. Another company is Nopla, also out of the UK. And they've been using seaweed to create these sort of aqueous coatings for things like takeaway containers, such as these burger boxes. So something you may not know, quite often those takeaway boxes that you get will be lined with either a PFAS coating or some other sort of synthetic coating which prevents the grease from, if you didn't have that there, your burger would essentially fall through the cardboard. So what Nopla is developing is a bioassimilating, bio-derived coating for takeaway containers that are both an oil barrier and a water barrier. Another rock star is polyhydroxyalkanoates. Bit of a mouthful, so everyone calls it PHA. The company that I'm working for started off developing this. And it's at the vanguard of what's being known as cellular-based materials. So the way PHA works is you've got like a feedstock. It could be cooking oil. We were using whey, which is the byproduct of making cottage cheese. And essentially you put them in these big vats with these little microbes. And was anyone here for Formidable Vegetable last night? Because they had a great song about microbes. I was just wishing I could have this playing now. But essentially you have these microbes feasting on those nutrients. And just like us as humans, when we overeat, we store our excess energy as fat. These little microbes store their excess energy as the biopolymer polyhydroxyalkanoates. Now, the hack with this material is that you can compact this powder into pellets, and then essentially you can put those pellets into existing plastic molding machines. So no new machinery is required, just that existing plastic infrastructure, which is everywhere. We can just put these materials in. So the tests that we've done at Phantm, we've found that all you had to do was drop the temperature down and up the pressure compared to plastic. But otherwise, out the other end of this plastic molding machine comes a material that looks like plastic, feels like plastic, it's shelf stable, it can be dishwasher proof. But the important thing is, so this is a company from Shellworks, and they're really focusing on beauty-based materials. So it's more expensive than plastic. So I think you'll start seeing a lot of PHA going into high margin markets where luxury these days is also about purity. So certain beauty products can sort of say, look, we're not putting our products into a toxic plastic, we're putting it into a natural material. But the really important thing is that when this thing goes into the recovery landscape, or it ends up in the environment, lo and behold, it degrades. And that's the reason it biodegrades is that essentially the microbes in the environment that they've been put into see the material as a food source. So because these materials are thicker, it takes a longer time, just like putting your broccoli stalk in your compost heap. A big fat broccoli stalk will take ages to break down. So will these materials because they're a bit thicker. But degrade into nothing, go back to nature, they do. Another big one that's been getting a lot of traction recently is molded pulp and paper and pulp. Been around for a while as the humble egg carton. Been around as long as I have, and I've been around a while. But as I'm sure you'll agree that material is quite sort of flimsy, so it's had a bit of an upgrade. So this company, Polpak, they've got a technology where they're able to sort of get a real sort of strength and density to the pulp. It's also able to be manufactured at the similar speed to plastic molding as well. And they're able to make, excuse me, bottles out of them, coffee lids, coffee cups, even the blister packs for your medicines as well. This is getting a lot of traction, because these are compostable, they're recyclable, you can go into the paper waste recycling stream. And it's existing. Once again, it's existing technology. One of the watch outs for this is making sure that you don't have those synthetic liners. I think I saw Absolute Vodka got a lot of PR about their paper-based bottle, but when I dug into it, I found out that it had a plastic lining in it. So you want to make sure that, that they're using examples such as Noppler's seaweed-based coatings, but then PHA, the material I showed you before, is also being used in coatings as well for oil and moisture barriers. Another watch out for this material is making sure that the feedstock for this pulp is recycled materials or agricultural byproducts or using fast-growing grasses, because we certainly don't want the paperization of everything, as some people are calling it, to be causing any deforestation. So you might be thinking, happy days, we're on the path to a materials economy of soils, not oils. But that's not the case, unfortunately. And it's largely down to our recovery landscape. So you cannot put these materials into your green bins at the moment. And that's really unfortunate. And it comes down to another nasty material known as PFAS. Has everyone heard of PFAS? Yeah, a few nods, a few shakes. So PFAS, it's a category of incredibly useful material, but just lethal. And I think it was invented by 3M, and it's used in all sorts of things like fire retardant foam. The firemen are using. I think there was a cancer cluster down near the Hawkesbury, where there was an army base that was using a lot of it down there. That's the unstable version. There's a more stable version that's used in all your non-stick fry pans. That's used, and also in your air fryers. It's also used in your Gore-Tex to sort of keep your Patagonia jacket, or I don't know if Patagonia is still using it anymore, waterproof shoes and whatnot. And it's a really nasty material, carcinogenic, and they're known as forever chemicals, so they stick around forever. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning this here is, other than the fact that it's microplastic cousins, it sticks around, it's causing all sorts of problems, is that the New South Wales EPA a few years ago discovered that their compost heaps the PFAS levels in their compost heaps had spiked massively. So they got some people in to have a look, and I spoke to one of the advisors, and he was telling me that they found that the culprit were these takeaway containers and also these wooden knives and forks. And they discovered that PFAS is being used as an oil and water barrier in these, and as binding agents. And everybody from cafes to us consumers thought we're doing the right thing, not using plastic, wooden knife and fork into the compost bin. Unfortunately, that sent PFAS through the roof. And basically there's now a blanket ban in New South Wales, and other councils are following, so there's no real end-of-life pathway for these materials to go into our green bins and into the composting infrastructure. And that's really unfortunate because I've been at some packaging conferences where essentially a lot of these materials makers are being accused of greenwash. Cafes selling compostable coffee cups. They're saying that that's greenwash because unless they've got their own closed loop system where they're composting the cups, if it goes in the green bin at the sorting level, it's getting taken out and diverted off to landfill. And that's really unfortunate because it's the people making these materials, these genuinely compostable, certified compostable materials, they're not doing anything wrong. It's just that our policy settings and our infrastructure, which is really unfortunate because we just a question. FOGO is food organics and garden organics. They're starting to roll out now where you can put your kitchen organics into your green bin. Just a bit of a show of hands. Who lives in a local government area where you can do that? A few hands. So it's starting to roll out. It's starting to roll out massively in New South Wales, but there's going to be a national rollout. And early signs are showing that it's successful. Recently in Sydney, there was a lot of pushback because the red bin, the landfill bin, being able to put your kitchen scraps in your green bin meant that instead of the red bin being picked up once a week, it was once every 2 weeks. So there was some anxiety and natural resistance to this, but that resistance has pretty much slowly dissipated, and everybody's getting behind this, and we're now going to be diverting millions of tons of waste to compost heaps instead of landfill. Because what happens with organic waste in an anaerobic environment that is no oxygen, instead of breaking down, essentially it breaks down as methane, which is obviously a very powerful greenhouse gas. So we want to be keeping organics out of our landfill, and we want to be keeping compostable materials out of our landfill. And we've got the infrastructure for them to be doing it. I've spoken to industrial composters. They are willing to take these materials, but they've said they just need the support. They need to know that the materials that they're getting do not have toxins or emergent contaminants in them. And then they sort of said with those thicker materials, they just have to go into windrows, which are these kind of big open rows. They'll put them together with the garden waste rather than the food waste, and it will take a couple of months, but essentially these materials will go back to soil. But this is the bottleneck, and we've got the innovation, we've got the materials, we've got an end of life infrastructure and process, but it's just at the legislative and policy level that this isn't happening. And look, the PFAS thing was a shock, but to be fair, it's everywhere. Unfortunately, it's in us at the moment. So we need to use that as a teaching moment. And I think, we just need to make sure that we've got really strong, robust, clear compost certification methods. We've done it before. I mean, we look at food, medicine, aviation, vehicles. Our institutions, while not perfect, generally pretty good at keeping us safe. So we just need to have some really strong certification measures to make sure these compostable materials are compostable, have no toxins, have no emerging contaminants. And then we need to make sure then that those materials then have a pathway into our FOGO system. So reduces friction. I mean, look, a lot of people live in apartments. Some of us can put these materials into our backyard compost. But at the rate at which we're using them, we essentially need this to be a part of our waste system to ensure that people can put these into their bins and have them collected curbside. Then there's another element. The end of this year, the government is slated to be introducing tough new packaging laws. And it's looking like there's going to be based upon extended producer responsibility. So what that means, it's like a polluter pays system. So if people are using single-use plastics, either they're making them or they're using them for their products, they can continue to use them. They just have to pay a landfill levy. Whereas if you're using non-damaging materials, you don't pay that levy at all. Now, we need that to include not just recycling, we need it to include composting. Because it's easier for them, the government is largely focusing on plastic recycling, so we need to put pressure on the government. Labor had a massive win last night, which is exciting. Hopefully with a big win like that, they'll be a bit braver with their environmental policy. I was hoping for a minority government to provide a little bit of extra pressure, but hey, that's you've got to take the wins. But we really do need to be applying pressure to Tanya, to the Albanese government, to make sure that this extended producer responsibility really has teeth, because that will level the playing field for some of these materials to then have a viability. It sends a signal and incentive for companies to use these materials over plastic, which is going to be important if they're going to scale. Because that's not the only problem that's facing these incredible innovators. So the company I work for, Phantm, we started making PHA. We were working with the CSIRO in order to do it. We successfully got to bench scale. We were ready to pull the trigger on obtaining $10 million in investment for a pilot plant. But then we ran the numbers and the unit economics didn't quite stack up. This was before Albo's green manufacturing legislation. There wasn't enough offtake domestically, and then us exporting to overseas markets didn't quite stack up. So we pivoted into data. And some companies, recently a PHA company went broke, a really big one. And that's because basically there's this valley of death between early adoption and mass adoption. Now, if these materials are going to replace plastics, they have to get to mass adoption, because they need the economies of scale and those kind of reliable supply chains if we're going to be able to replace plastic. So what that means is these early innovators, that some of which I've spoken about, such as Sway or Nopla and Polpak, they need guaranteed demand from brands. And those brands, giving them that guaranteed demand then sends a signal to the investors. There's a market for this material. I'm going to invest and help them scale. So when we scale, the cost comes down, the virtuous cycle continues. And then it's on us as consumers to pressure the brands that we buy to be supporting these kinds of businesses and materials as well. So to cap it all off, what needs to happen? We need to curb new plastics and petrochemical plants. We need to turn the tap off at the source where fossil fuels become plastics. We need to end the use of non-essential plastics, so focus plastic only where using plastic only where it's absolutely necessary and not for throwaway convenience. We need to mandate reduction, reuse and refill systems. I could do a whole lot of talk on that. But we need to shift business models from disposable to durable. And even with this, we want the materials we're using for these systems to be bio-based as well. And with that, promoting green chemistry and safe renewable alternatives. So that is prioritising non-toxic, bio-based and bioassimilating materials that come from nature and can bioassimilate back into it. Brands must provide guaranteed demand for natural alternatives. Brands backing these materials send early signals to investors that scaling is worth it. And then we need to implement extended producer responsibility to make polluters pay for the real environmental costs of plastic. Plastic isn't cheap. It's just externalising all of the costs to the environment and to society. So that's why it's a program like this, it brings the cost back in, it acknowledges it and has the people making money from it pay for the costs. And then really importantly is to direct 100% of those EPR funds into real solutions. So investing in the certification, the collection and the composting of these novel and regenerative materials. And maybe then we might have a materials economy based on soils, not oils. But it is a ways off, and in the meantime, look, I'm probably preaching to the converted with a lot of these ones, but look, for a start, we can consume less. Reducing demand at the source is the most powerful climate and materials action you can make. Shop at farmers markets and bulk store. I live in Mullumbimby. I'm lucky I've got a wonderful farmers market and able to drastically reduce the amount of plastics that we use for our grocery shopping, but still it's astonishing how much plastic is still in our bins. It really is unavoidable. Really important, this one, support brands making an effort. Every purchase sends a signal that there's a market for better material systems, and seek them out where possible. And this is also really important, and that is to be forgiving for brands that are trying. I just noticed if anyone's a customer of Zero Co, they recently closed shop, so that's heartbreaking. I think there were some other issues there, but once again, a brand trying to do the right thing just because of their perverse incentives to do the wrong thing ends up going bust. So be forgiving of brands that are trying. This stuff is really hard. Quite often when you're innovating, maybe the product or the packaging doesn't perform as well, but we need to be forgiving, as particularly if they're being transparent about their failures. And this one's really important. Pressure your local MP about the tough new packaging laws that are coming in up in 2025. So that's it from me. I have a blog and newsletter called What's the Matter at whatsthematter.info. It's free, so you can go on there and subscribe. Essentially, if anything I've written about today, spoken about today, has interested you, I've written about it over the past 6 months. I've taken a little bit of a hiatus with cyclones and sporting events and whatnot, but I'll be back on track soon. That QR code is for my LinkedIn. If you are on that hell site, I do connect with people on there. But yeah, look, thank you very much for your attention. And I really do believe that we can have a materials economy based on soils, not oils, but there's some challenges to overcome first. So, thank you. Yeah, and if anyone has any questions, please put your hand up and then a microphone will come your way.
Great talk, Mike. Thank you. Just on the kelp. Now, the kelp oceans or the kelp forests produce 70% of our oxygen on Earth. If we start harvesting those to make packaging, are we creating another problem for ourselves?
Yeah, there's look, we're certainly not advocating those harvesting those old kelp forests. This is actual sort of it's seaweed farming. So it's in terms of, look, there's always everything we do has an impact. What we want to do is have a beautiful impact, right? So, or a positive impact. So seaweed farming, it doesn't take up arable land. It's really fast growing. The growth of them sequesters carbon. It supports coastal communities in the global south. There's a company out of Western Australia called Ulu who are making PHA from seaweed. So they use the seaweed and they ferment it to get the sugars to feed the microbes to make the PHA. Now they're having their seaweed grown out in Indonesia with coastal communities. And the great thing about these startups is they're really cognizant that you don't want to end up with a salmon farming kind of predicament where you've got like a monoculture. So it's a lot of these farmers are farming with regenerative principles. So. Any other questions?
I was just wondering if you could expand on the PFA issue with the recyclable crockery. So you sort of said that New South Wales banned it because there was a spike because it was in the utensils and cardboard packaging, but then can you just expand a bit about, is it not there anymore?
Look,
or how did it get there? And
yeah, so very good question. My colleague, so it's a little bit unofficial. It's certainly not the New South Wales EPA's line, but one of the people who did the studies on it, I've worked with, and he was saying, I asked that question, and he said he honestly didn't know if it was ignorance that they didn't know, because they're all sort of saying this is compostable, sort of, it wasn't necessarily certified. But I think that's one of the issues, because we've just got these, and the ACCC recently has put in some really tough greenwash laws, and a lot of greenwash just comes from really vague claims, and what a lot of companies are doing. We want to feel like we're doing good when we're buying the product, so they're hacking into that behavioural, this behaviour of ours, where really it's just kind of like do good for the environment, better for the environment, doing our bit for the environment, and but there's no data backing that up. So they haven't done an LC, a life cycle assessment. They're not certified. So these materials were just kind of, just looked good. And so he wasn't sure whether it was ignorance that they used, the material that they knew, that they just didn't know the material they're using was toxic, or if it was something more nefarious. He doesn't know. He said it might have been a combination of the two. Whether or not that has been stopped in a lot of these materials, I don't know. But I do know it has resulted in the New South Wales EPA. It's kind of like once bitten, twice shy. The only thing that's allowed in New South Wales compost heaps is certified compostable caddy liners for the FOGO bins, and that's because people need them for composting if you're living in a flat, but also they disappear really quickly as well. But there has been some contamination it's one of the issues. So there's two sources of contamination in FOGO that needs to be addressed, and that is plastic fruit stickers, and I'm guilty of it. I'm making a margarita and I chop up my lines, and then I find that I've got half a sticker in there. A lot of fruit stickers are ending up in the compost heaps, and it's contaminating them because they're so small. But then also, Coles and Woolies are selling biodegradable bags that are not compostable. So it's just really simple. It's just that if a material is meant to be biodegradable, it's either plastic and recyclable, or it's certified compostable. We shouldn't be allowing anything on the supermarket shelves that isn't certified compostable. So, I think, I don't know. I'm not sure whether Queensland has banned that, but in New South Wales, it was a real problem. Yep.
I was just wondering what you think of the Greenpeace plastic treaty.
The plastic treaty that's trying to be negotiated at the United Nations.
Yeah. Some people think it's a waste of time, and other people think it's good.
Yeah, it's so I think the number of fossil fuel delegates at the UN, the ICN5, outnumbered the number of actual delegates from nations. Look, on the one hand, it was disappointing. They didn't reach an agreement. I actually think it was probably the best case scenario given what was happening. So there's the bad actors, which is, I think, Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and then I think America and China kind of sat it out. But they're all big plastic producing nations, and they ran a lot of interference, kind of saying it shouldn't be extended producer responsibility, which just needs to be recycling. In which case, that would be a waste of time. But there is this really strong caucus, I think it's called the Group of Ambition or something like that, of about 100 nations. And it started off originally with just Fiji. So I think we need to hold the line, we need to believe, we need to get behind. So it's gone from just being Fiji to something like 110 countries that really want to have global anti-plastic or plastic regulation with teeth. So I think, it's easy to get despondent. As with these things, it's always a negotiation. I think going for consensus with those countries running interference is probably a waste of time. I think probably what needs to happen is we're going to proceed without you. So without those 5 nations, the rest of us are going to do this. You guys can do whatever you like. But unfortunately, the UN is all about consensus. But for consensus to work, consensus only works when everybody goes home feeling like they've got something. And that's not what's happening. These talks are getting hijacked by interests that are not even allowing that. So I think if consensus isn't possible, then we probably do need to just exclude those 5 nations and proceed without them.
Can I just say another thing? With personal recycling, it's annoying because the only way for it to actually work is with proper education, because within every different council is different recycling. And I've moved around quite a lot, and I'm constantly pulling things out of the recycling bin and trying to educate housemates on how to look things up.
Yeah.
But they need some kind of system, like a sticker on a bin or a pull out in a newspaper, not that they have them anymore, or an app. But so much is getting, what's the word, where
it's confusing.
A lot of recycling is also just going to the trash as well, because it's not all the commingling, all the infestation isn't the right word. I can't find
Contamination.
it. Contamination.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's a lost cause unless they start actually educating people on it.
Yeah. It's a huge problem. Even at home, I find even myself sometimes there's a term called wish cycling. So, for instance, all those most councils cannot recycle the clam packaging that you get your berries in. That it just goes straight to landfill. But everyone puts them in their recycling bin. Tetra Packs. It says there. It
has a recycling logo
on
on
it.
It
says, this is recyclable. It's technically recyclable. Tetra Packs have recycling plants where you can recycle them, but it's really expensive. It's those plants are really few and far between. I think they recycle maybe 30% of their Tetra Packs globally, and they're called hybrid materials. They're awful. So those materials might all be recyclable, but you've got plastic with aluminium, with cardboard, with plastic. So it's all and to extract those materials out, it means it just doesn't make economic sense to recycle them. So I think we need to be focusing on harmonising. So to your point, where you go to a different council and everything's different, I'm hoping that with this legislation at the end of the year, that we'll have these harmonised recycling. So this is what you can recycle anywhere in Australia, and this is what you can't. So everyone's really clear, and then you can do an education. The Australian recycling label has become a lot clearer, where if you have a look now on a lot of products, it's like the lid goes to landfill, but the box goes into recycling, so that's clearer. But yeah, I think ultimately they're moving towards monomaterials, so it just makes it really simple. It's this kind of plastic and this kind of cardboard, and it goes over there to get recycled. Or, like I said, ideally, if it's not an infinitely recyclable material like aluminium, we should be going into a biocircular system where it can then, go back to nature. We have one here. Yeah, so that was just a question about glass recycling. Look, glass is a wonder material. It's recyclable. You kind of get some issues with the different colours. You need to sort of separate, green recycling and brown recycling and clear. I think one of the issues with glass is when you do a life cycle assessment on a lot of products, because of its weight, so in terms of transportation, it's bulky, it takes up more room, it's fragile because it breaks easily. So there's an argument, in fact, that the pro-fossil fuel, pro-plastics lobby is kind of saying, and in some ways they're right, in a life cycle analysis, a plastic bottle has less of an impact on the environment than glass due to emissions and carbon. It's just that they conveniently leave out end of life and what happens, and a lot of those life cycle analysis is assumed that the plastic is going to get recycled, when often it isn't. But I think it's one of those things where we'll need different solutions for different products. I think glass is great when there's a lot of reuse. We're using a lot of glass jars at home, so if I go to Source Bulk Foods, I'll get my my flowers and everything in a brown paper bag and sort of put it in a glass jar. But I think there's the issues of weight and fragility with glass. But otherwise, look, it's recyclable and can be a good solution, or a solution that's part of the mix. Any more? Yeah.
How do we also address the pressure that the media puts on the general public, consumers, compared to businesses? In cafes I used to work at, I would put a bag under the till because all the glass and aluminium was going in a black bin, and I would take it home and put it in my own bin. So
good on you.
How do you, you have to make businesses accountable for the stuff that they're putting on their shelves.
Yeah.
And behind the bar, where you're paying for a service, so you shouldn't have to worry about what they're doing behind their bar. But is it legislative or
Yeah. Look, I couldn't agree more. And one of the biggest most evil hacks that the plastic industry put on us was recycling, like having us deal with the consequences of their industry. I think ultimately that's what the extended producer responsibility legislation is about. So if you sort of think about it, it's extending the responsibility to the producer for end of life. And look, it's a really broad term. In England, they've introduced it, and it's kind of a bit lackluster, but it can also really have teeth. And I think, look, we're going to have to acknowledge that the business lobbies are really powerful in our politics. We've got a cost of living crisis. So if we go in really hard and immediately start charging the true cost, which is really what we should be doing, then there could be a backlash that could be very easily funded by industry to nip this in the bud. So I think we maybe need to boil the frog a bit slowly and just slowly introduce and just give businesses a chance to readjust and just to slowly dial it up so that eventually they're able to get their systems in place where they're taking on board that responsibility. Because that's just it. Like, plastic is so cheap because the cost of it is externalized to the environment, but then also to us. Where we pay, our council rates pay for them to pick up and recycle and pick up that waste when really they're pocketing it's that whole thing of externalizing the costs and privatizing the profits. Yeah. Great. Well, thanks a lot, everyone. Like I said, write to your MP.
Keep that going, guys. Thank you so much, Matt. We could keep going on conversations about this all night, I'm sure. So
yeah, happy to have a chat if anyone wants to just come up.